Hi, my name is Christina, but you might know me as Wanderlusting Hippie. I was a full-time nomad for 7 years, traveling across the US, Southeast Asia, and Europe. And these are some of my stories. Let's talk. Hi, and welcome to the first episode of Let's Talk. I'm going to start today by sharing a little bit about how I became a traveler in the first place. There's so many people out there who love travel now or are afraid to do it. I feel like it's a big divide. I personally was someone who was terrified before I ever went on my first trip. However, like many of us, it was a breakup that influenced me going. I was living with someone in Atlanta, and we'd been together for quite a few years, but I took a job that brought me on the road for 6 months. And after 6 months of being apart, he would fly out to see me periodically, but I think we realized that the relationship had kind of run its course. The only problem is that we lived together. So instead of going back to Atlanta, I had saved up all this money from being on the road. I decided, you know what? We're going to take a clean break. We're going to literally eat, pray, love it because Bali was my first place I went to. So I booked a plane ticket while I was on the road. I did not have a passport at the time. I just booked an international plane ticket and thought, you know, I'll figure that part out. And that sums up most of how my traveling went. It was a lot of winging it, but I made a lot of great mistakes that I hope I can share with you guys so you don't make the same ones. So I did buy my first plane ticket to Bali, and it was a one-way ticket. I had no return ticket. And I had about 2 weeks to get my passport before I left for my flight. So I was cutting it really close. Fortunately, I was able to do that, though. I got an expedited passport, and my best friend took me to the airport the morning of, and I don't know if you've traveled or not yet, but there's this feeling that you get when you're taking your first solo international trip. And it is a mix of wanting to throw up and cry and run away. And a lot of people think travel is so exciting, and it is. But until you've done it, you don't know. And it's just the huge fear of the unknown that kept me scared. So I remember being in line, terrified. And there was also a volcano that was erupting in Bali at that time. So we weren't sure if our flight was going to be able to actually land or not. Thankfully, we did get in before it erupted, but that was a whole nother stress level added to my first international solo trip. So I'm in line alone, and I happened to see a couple right in front of me that were probably around my age, if not a year or two older. And I decided to strike up a conversation. And I mentioned that I was going alone, and it was my first time leaving the country. And thank goodness I made friends with them. We had separate seats on the plane, but we had a layover in Taipei. And they found me as we were getting off the plane, and they said, hey, you can come stay with us, which I did. I hung out with them around the airport because I knew we all had to get on the same next flight. And that really taught me how easy it is to make friends while you travel. That was something that I was very afraid of, that I think a lot of people are very afraid of when they travel solo, especially for the first time, is how are you going to meet people and make friends? And it was something as simple as saying hello that made me this great friendship, and they helped me navigate the Taipei airport. We made sure we all got on the flight to Bali together. And then we said goodbye. And that was beautiful. I went to my hotel, they went their own direction, and we exchanged social media, we kept up online. But that really taught me that hellos and goodbyes come very easily when you're traveling. And that has served me wonderfully in life, because I met so many beautiful people while I was traveling, but I knew that a goodbye was right around the corner. And I don't take that for granted. I think a lot of people are used to growing up in their own little neighborhood with their group of friends and knowing them throughout their whole life. And I had that when I was a child, but there's something about being able to give yourself and make that connection and say that hello, knowing that a goodbye is coming. And it makes the interaction so raw and pure and beautiful. And I think that was the number one thing that I took away from my first solo trip, is that you're going to meet a lot of people. I was terrified that I would meet nobody. And I met my first friends 15 minutes into the trip. But I was terrified that I would meet nobody. And it's actually quite the opposite of that. You will meet a lot of people, but you will also say goodbye to a lot of people. And you have to be okay with both.
You know, the number one thing I've been asked is how to make friends here. And I decided to take myself out for last night in Bali dinner. And I saw a guy that was sitting... I saw a guy that was sitting alone. And it was the only person that I had seen in the cafe who was alone. So I decided to take my drink and go over to him, and I said, "Hi, I see you're alone. I'm alone too. Do you mind if I sit with you?" And luckily, he was receptive to that. He said, "Yeah, okay." So I came and sat with him. He's another traveler, happened to be from Australia. Super cool dude. Hung out with him for a couple hours. And now I'm headed back to the house. But it was really nice to just sit and talk about the places we've been. And, you know, I traveled to here and I learned this and I experienced this. And you shouldn't be afraid to stop and meet people, because people are willing to talk to you if you're willing to talk to them. And that's something we forget sometimes in this life. So don't be afraid to say hello.